to everybody on the calendar that's publicly accessible to everybody. So I am now recording. So welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project meeting. As I just explained as I press start, we are recording the meeting. It'll be producing transcripts and a video recording, and also the chat messages, if you choose to put them in the chat, will be recorded. We've got quite a few new joiners, which is lovely to see coming in to the meeting today. We could go around the room to do the introductions. If you can be kind of brief, I think that's probably the most nice way for people to do this. I guess we can call out the order in which we see them. Actually, can you put your hand up if it's the first time you've come, and then I'll see the people who put their hands up. Anybody putting their hand up? Arjen, you're the first to raise your hand. Could you do a brief introduction?
Yeah, good morning. Arjen Ketra, port-based in the Netherlands. We are a daughter company of the Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Arjen. Anybody else that's fresh to the meeting? Do you want to say hello, Anne? I know that we know each other reasonably well from other work we've done. Oh, Ivan, indeed, Ivan Marin. Could you introduce yourself? That's going to be very useful from Glyph.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my name is Ivan Marin. I work for the Glyph, the Global Legal Entity Identification Foundation. It's a Swiss non-for-profit foundation, and we work mainly in fostering or promoting the LEI codes, which identifies the legal entities on global basis seamlessly and in a unique way. So I don't know if you are familiar with the foundation. For those who aren't, I invite you to visit glyph.org. Okay. In any case, you can now reach me directly for further information. I'm here just to contribute to help you to build up your project strongly and share our global experience on distributing and creating global credentials for legal entities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. In fact, Glyph is going to be one of the main topics of conversation during today, as yourselves and other organizations like GS1 have a significant role to play in the sort of trade discussions for CEFACT. I can't see any other hands up, so I'm going to move to the next slide. This is the agenda that we published for today. So we've done a little bit of the introduction on sort of people. There's a code of conduct, which I'll just share with you in a second, about participation in the CEFACT projects in general and for these meetings guests as well. I'm just admitting some more arrivals. What I would ask of you is that if you haven't introduced yourself, but you'd like to put that in the chat for the meeting, by all means, put in your personal sort of like name and company or interest, whatever. That'd be fantastic. Because otherwise it's anonymous. Unless you say something, we won't capture the details of anybody that attends the meetings. It's up to you to sort of make yourself visible if you choose. The two things we want to talk about today, and that's why I'm so pleased to see Steve has arrived, is one is around just a sort of bit of admin, but it's actually really important about the digital identity anchor work that was done inside UNTP, the project I mentioned prior. And that work is going to be sort of pulled into the Global Trust Registry work, and I think it's worth having Steve and I sort of part of that conversation to explain kind of what that means and where it's come from, because there are some people that are already contributing thinking to the DIA work. So I can't see Marcus online at the moment, Alina, but Marcus, who's from South America, looking after a number of the countries in South America and some of their work and trade areas, has provided some ideas on the future changes to the DIA specs. So we'll show you what that looks like now. We'll talk about how we're going to bring it into this project. And then we're going to get to the really interesting, I think, not that that isn't interesting, but the really interesting part of the conversation, which is about Glyph. So those are the two things I kind of want to go through. The code of conduct and intellectual property rules for CEFACT projects are publicly available. You can click the links, if you like, on this deck of the slide deck to find the accessible content. But basically, every project under the CEFACT rules has an open standards kind of approach to the work. They should be royalty-free content. Any contribution is therefore treated in that way. And that's when, if you go through the process of application to be a CEFACT expert, as part of that application, you accept the rules, if you like, of property rights and other factors. So that's part of that application process. What we're doing, because some people's applications are being slow to process, is that if you've applied, send us the confirmation of application to us, and then we can basically take it on note that you've accepted the conditions and you'll be an active contributor. Otherwise, everybody on this call is able to be an observer and in the context of this discussion can contribute to the discussion. You just can't kind of write content into the documents unless you've accepted the sort of terms and conditions. There are some other conditions around any head of delegation for a country that recommends an expert. That expert approaches us, we should welcome them into the project. I think that should be said without, we'll do that without saying. And those are probably the key things to remember about the work in this project. The OCA standards, and it'll be royalty free. Existing DIA work. Now, Steve is online. I don't know if you were ready to share content. I can get up the web pages and stuff, Steve, if it's easier. Do you want to start talking about just briefly what the digital identity anchor work was and how we're moving it into Global Trust Registry?
Yeah, sure. I can take the screen briefly and just show it on the website and talk through why it's there. So let me do that entire screen. Screen one. Share somewhere here. Here we go. This, if you can see it, is a website describing a thing called the UN Transparency Protocol, which is a project that's not finished but fairly mature now. That includes a whole bunch of interoperability specifications, including things like digital product passports, facility records, and so on and so forth. And it's meant to support a decentralized supply chain traceability and transparency perspective, which means lots of different tools and technologies and bits and pieces throughout a long supply chain issue data like product passports. And when they do that, we also decided to adopt verifiable credentials as a technology standard so that the data can be tamper evident. And have some integrity. Right? The challenge is, of course, that a VC, for those that are familiar with that technology, is issued by whoever is the issuer, and usually with a DID that they create, decentralized identity, that is really just represents a key pair, but doesn't necessarily trace to a high integrity identity. So you know when you verify, for example, a digital product passport issued by DID XYZ, that it's definitely issued by whoever holds the private key for DID XYZ, but you don't necessarily know who DID XYZ is. So we added this is all the bits and pieces of UNTP, this thing called a digital identity anchor. And there's a little diagram here that maybe helps explain it. Which is a way to bind, basically, the identifier of the product passport issuer to another credential, separate credential, issued by some authority, right? Such as, I don't know, the Australian Tax Office issues a credential saying that we've verified that the controller of the DID that issued that controller of DID XYZ is also known to us as Australian business number 123. Right, and so that basically makes a little chain of trust. And the reason it's not in wallet binding is because of the decentralized nature of these long supply chains. And this is only one example of a kind of, if you like, verifiable linked data chain. But what we realized quickly is that this concept of linking the identity of an issuer of something to an authoritative identity applies equally to use cases that are nothing to do with sustainability and product passports, works equally well for issuers of invoices and bills of lading and so on and so forth. So we thought, let's move this thing out of a specification which is all about supply chain traceability and transparency and make it more general, and also make sure it fits maybe broader use cases that we hadn't thought about. Right? And so that's why John's project was created, which is this Global Trust Register, to take on and continue to develop this digital identity anchor specification as guidance to national business registers, and actually not just business registers, asset registers, product registers, whatever. Any registrar that has members where there's value in the member being able to prove their membership to someone else, right? And that could be an IP register, it could be a business register, it could be a trademark register, for example. There are many types of registers where that connection between a business transaction and a verifiable identity is important or valuable. And so you can read, this is public. It's just moved, by the way, from GitHub to a UN GitLab repository, and it's got this rather weird URL with FPB 455. That's going to change sometime in the next week, I hope, to a simple URL, which is untp.unece.org. But we're just in a kind of transition state at the moment. But if you just Google UNTP, you'll get taken to the GitHub. It'll redirect you here, and you'll find it if you're interested in. Yeah, is that enough, John?
I think
in terms of an introduction.
If there's any, there's some prior meetings that we've walked through the DIA and its use and given some very simple sort of use cases about how the thinking kind of works in a sort of work through example. So I encourage you to look at prior meetings to sort of see that. For the practical consideration, we also will have, this project has a GitLab site now under the UNICC space, and what we're going to be doing, Steve and I, is moving content. Copying content over, moving content over. We need to decide, Steve, how to faithfully represent what has happened and to bring in what is going to happen into the new space in this project, and not leave a hole, if you like, in UNTP. So there's a bit of sort of tidying, moving stuff to do, including history. Or do we start from a blank? Do we start from a snapshot of the state as it reached in UNTP, and then we move on from there inside this project?
I would imagine that we'll create another GitLab pages site, a bit like this, maybe a bit simpler because there's less sort of granular specifications in yours, and basically cut and paste this section into yours, and then this section on UNTP would just point to your project. Yeah. So, okay. And it would continue from there. Now, the issues and all that, there are a bunch of issues here that have been migrated from GitHub. Whether you leave them here or copy them over, I don't know. I don't think it matters.
I guess there's only if there's anything we'll take anything useful.
Yes, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Anything that's useful we'll bring over.
But that'd be good. Recreate any valuable issues that are still kind of important thinking as yet unresolved, and make them issues in your repository. Yeah, and then you work through them in your project. Yeah.
So just another quick check. I've now got access to that repository. In fact, if I click on this link here, and if you stop sharing your screen for a bit, it will show now the GitLab page. That's a sort of a blank page. Well, this is the UNTP pages actually, but the CEFACT projects are these projects that are being set up, and just have to admit somebody else into the meeting, and you'll see that the UNTP project is one of them, and so is GTR, which is the Global Trust Registry acronym. Our pages are currently blank. They're less than 24 hours old, so forgive me for not having completed.
You're definitely forgiven for that.
So that's going to happen, and it's going to move us away from, again, sharing my screen, this sort of space that I knocked up very quickly, which was just to sort of give some public visibility to sort of content that was hard to share on the official CEFACT space. So this project space will move. The content is going to be put into these files and folders that we have here. The Lena, for example, has been working on, like, the requirements for registrars to meet to be recognized under the GTR. This document and its contents will be transferred into effectively a kind of a markdown and then presented model inside the GitLab pages. So there's a bit of work to do, a bit of admin work, but once we're there, it should be possible then for everybody to raise issues, propose changes, and so on in that environment.
You can make a choice, by the way, John, about whether you take a Word document like that and turn it into Markdown, or whether you just attach the Word document. It depends whether it's going to be subsequently distributed. That's kind of your project choice. But
yeah,
the nice thing about putting all this on the UNICC GitLab is that the UN itself is then confident in announcing, sharing, pointing at it because it's under their control, right? So
yeah.
that's
I
the
like
main
that.
reason.
I like that. I think that's actually what I want to achieve. I think the only challenge for us is that many of us on this call are probably quite familiar with a sort of desktop productivity tools like Word documents to edit.
Of course.
And that can just be a barrier for some to consider things like forks and pull requests and issues.
Yeah. Our experience is similar on UNTP, right? And what we do is say, look, nobody has to learn how to use GitHub and source control repositories in order to contribute meaningfully to the project. You can just raise an issue and write stuff or put it in an email, and there's some technical assistant on the project that can turn that into merge commits and things like this. Let's not put a barrier of
that's my philosophy too. So that's what we're going to be doing. I guess a commitment from both of us, Steve, over the next 2 weeks, maybe. I don't know if that's possible for you, but we would like to, in say 2 weeks' time, be able to say, look, we've got now the UNTP content on DIA is now in the space for GTR, and here it is, and we can start sort of working on it from there. That would be cool. Thank you. The next thing is probably the more interesting. I think that was fascinating, but for other people on this call, the main reason maybe for a significant interest is this idea about this project, the Global Trust Registry project, has this ambition to create what we've called in other discussions a directory or a list of a trustworthy list of registrars, authoritative registrars. And Alina's been coaching me very well about what to understand about what makes a registrar authoritative and the legal meaning of that sort of term. So there's a bunch of thinking that I pointed very briefly at that exists in a document. But if we start on this path, we need to consider what about the existing systems that are already being used in a number of places. I mentioned GS1 earlier. There's very clearly GLEIF, GLEIF, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, and the work it's done. And we probably need to consider how does this project relate with those projects. Steve.
Yeah, just a thought. I wonder whether we need to limit ourselves to registrars that pass some sort of authority criteria, or whether that's an attribute in the directory where it's easy to distinguish between those and others that are perhaps not bound by some national regulation or something like this. I don't know the answer to that, but it could be valuable to have both. And the members on the call, there's an analogy here with a thing called the ICAO PKR. I don't know if you're familiar with that, PKD. It's a list. It's a white list of passport signers, and it's how smart gates and or various things around the world work for people traveling today. So the UN has a bit of a history in maintaining these kind of authoritative lists. But
those are exactly the questions we're going to get into, I think, Steve. And so for everyone on the call, I don't propose this call answers those questions in categorical terms. We all want to canvass opinions and ideas rather than sort of landing on this is exactly what we're doing and nothing else. So this is a discussion. So I'm going to encourage all of the people in the call to either put things in chat or to put their hands up and contribute. Alina. Oh, you're on mute, sorry. Can you unmute yourself? That's it. Oh, can't hear you. I'm sorry. I can't see the mute thing anymore. It looks like you can talk. I'm sure you'll come back in a second. Is that okay if I carry on and then you'll come in when you want? Oh, try again. Silence. I'll talk for a bit and then please do interrupt me. This diagram I've got in front of me right now and in front of you is a reasonable logical model, if you like, of how things interplay when we're thinking about things like life. I want to walk through. Ivan.
Yes, just wanted to support your speech here, if you wish. Okay, just go ahead and I can complete
thank you.
Information. Okay.
So basically, I want to kind of step through just so that we haven't missed a point as we're going through it. So the start point in our use case, if you want to think of it that way, our story is an entity, a company, an organization that wants to be registered in some jurisdiction, that is a nation state of the United Nations or a legal environment or framework. So our company wants to register, say, in Spain. They want to speak to the registradores of Spain, or they want to speak in Australia to ASIC, and they register their business. So to do that, they provide a bunch of information about themselves, about the directors, about other things. And if that is accepted, having been checked, the authoritative register makes some entry into some sort of logbook of sorts, basically into a database, but they will generally allocate some sort of identifier, some number. So my little company has an ABN number, Australian business number, and that's standard for Australian businesses. So there's a particular representation, there's a number. If that entity wants to maintain this registration, they need to meet the legal obligations of the jurisdiction. So we have to report changes to the company. We have to report on other factors that are important for ASIC to know about. It's a legal obligation of the entity to provide this information. And similarly, ASIC or others might check on the company in a variety of ways to make sure that things are still true and proper for that organization. So there's a sort of interplay about maintaining the currency of data. If that organization wishes to have an LEI, legal entity identifier, through GLIFE, and for many organizations, that's actually quite useful for a number of reasons. It's a lot of trade finance and a lot of other factors. The European Banking Authority have looked at LEIs and VLIs as a necessary, useful condition. So a lot of reasons why an organization might want an LEI. To get an LEI, they have to approach a local operating unit, an organization that GLIFE has said is able to consider whether to give an LEI out in the jurisdiction that this entity is operating in. So several of these LOUs are actually kind of like international organizations. So Bloomberg, for example, is an organization that can actually provide LEIs in a number of different parts of the world. But the process by which they are recognized, and LOU is recognized, is basically they make an application to GLIFE. GLIFE checks to see whether they're a fit and proper organization to give out LEIs. So now our entity says, I would like to have an LEI. And again, they have to provide some information to say who they are. They provide, for example, the official registration that they had with the authority that they first registered with. The LOU will do a number of checks. Are they generally who they say they are? Is the data correct? And they might check directly on the data if it's accessible and verifiable directly, if it's published in some way. They might also make a request through to the authoritative registrar themselves. Might be other mechanisms. They do a number of checks to see is this organization a bona fide organization. Assuming they are, they will then issue that organization an LEI and provide to GLIFE sort of centrally updates to say we have a new LEI and this is the organization, this is the data. That data, that registration, that LEI is made publicly accessible by GLIFE through an indexed registrar. You can search for LEIs for any company that has one. And in addition, GLIFE maintain a registration authorities list. So these are the authorities that are, in a sense, each of these LEIs have been recognized through. So it's a list that's sort of separate to, but very much aligned with or important support of the LEI list. LEIs are quite sophisticated. They've got data that's considered level 1 and level 2. One of the things that GLIFE is aiming to do is to reduce the amount of sort of company fraud and misrepresentation. So who owns who is an important question in the GLIFE space. Now, back into our thinking about supply chains and other things, that actually could be interesting in the future. But our first point of reference might be, is this organization registered in the company they claim to be registered in? Are they a Spanish provider of Spanish products, as they claim to be? So we may have a different level of interest than GLIFE. So that's the basic kind of idea of some. Ivan, is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, absolutely. You explained very well. We are a non-for-profit Swiss foundation. We are not making no profit of this. We've been founded by the Financial Stability Board, promoted by the G20. So we have local operation units, as you've mentioned, as partners who operationally perform the issuance of the LEI codes. And it's important to mention that we take care of all the governance, consistency on global basis, all of this system. Okay, it's working all over the world in all the jurisdictions. So that's basically what we do. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's very sophisticated. The global database is publicly available. You can access via API or via website, whatever. You can automate all the actions. So that's how it works. And the main goal of this is to identify properly all the legal entities all over the world in a consistent way to operate in not only in the financial markets, in all the industries. So one of the key goals that we have is to avoid or to fight against money laundering and the bad usage of the capitals. So to have a full tracking of all of the transactions. But of course, you can use the LEI for many other actions and use cases like issue invoices, purchase orders, or any other use cases you can imagine. So it looks complex, the diagram, but at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. It's just...
My apologies, it's my diagram, Ivan, but I thought the elements I was showing were reasonably important for this discussion. Anne, you've got your hand up.
I like the diagram, and even forgive me if my questions are a bit ignorant because I'm not very familiar with Glyph yet. So when you check for the LOU checking it, do they check it only in their jurisdiction or they check it globally? For example, there would be only N checking in where I am, or would it be across the world that there's only one particular person associated with one particular area? Is that unique globally?
So if I understood properly the question, we have LOUs, local operation units, who are our branches or partners who issue the LEI codes. In that process, in the application process, they must be qualified. That means that they go through a very hard audit process, these LOUs, to become partners, because they are audited on regular basis, minimum on year basis, with very strict rules, and all the rules apply to all the partners, all the LOUs all over the world in the same way. So in the process of issuing the LEI, the vetting process is dependent on the jurisdiction, and that's why not all LOUs can issue LEIs in all jurisdictions, because they must know in deep how it works. They check against the business registers and other organizations they need to check against with all the data to issue the LEI for that legal entity. So
I think that's great, Marin. I noticed also that Steve has got his hand up as well. What I want to do is kind of this is exactly the conversation I want to have, but I kind of want to bring us into the scope for like alignment of these two projects and where the differences and opportunities lie, right? So I think I encourage everybody to read about Glyph because it's actually really interesting and it's made its documentation really quite publicly accessible and you can find out more about it, right? And I'm a particular fan of the VLive, for example, because I think that's a really smart little bit of tech. There's a slide here on the LEI structure. I just put that up there because you kind of can, because it's publicly available. You can sort of understand how this thing is structured. You'll see that the LOU is a sort of prefix for the identifier that's issued. And the interesting thing is that's very similar, as you might expect, to the GS1's GLN structure, which is the sort of something of the equivalent. Here, it's not equivalent because they have different governance and structures in those organizations. But in GS1's world, companies that register with the GS1 organization get a company prefix. And then the company is actually responsible for saying what locations they operate in. It's a very different regime. The problem that Glyph wants to solve and the rigor with which Glyph wants to solve it stems from this idea of financial fraud and risk and the Financial Stability Board and the G20. So that's a very different sort of model of thinking. Steve, your hand's been up for a while. Sorry, mate.
Not at all. I'm prepared to wait. I just wanted to ask, actually, I've had this discussion before, right? My observation is that most of those LOUs are reputable organizations in the target country, and very often they're banks, right? And so they already have, if you like, quite robust know your customer processes and so on and so forth. And I can fully understand why Glyph would want to build on that type of organization. It doesn't have to be a bank, but somebody has got integrity. But I wonder if the actual legal authority that issues business identifiers, let's say the Australian Tax Office or ASIC or in Registradores in Spain, were to issue their members with digital verifiable proof of membership, And if that member, for international trade purposes or because their customers demand it, also would like an LEI, then would that yellow bit in the middle be bypassed because you could trust the identity claim issued by a national authority, and you no longer need a intermediary? Or would you keep it there? Would it just accelerate the LOU process? You know, because at the end of the day, that yellow thing, as I understand it, is an on-the-ground, if you like, verifier of identity that Glyph can trust. And it's largely there because most or genuine legal registers don't do what we're asking them to do in this project, which is give their members digitally verifiable proof of membership that they can use.
So, Baron, you're prepared to answer the question thing? I was going to offer a suggestion, but please answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So very good point there. So first of all, we are not trying to replace any identifier. Okay, we are a complementary identifier. So we are contributing to add more security as an extra security layer and as an extra identifier layer. So you think we may bypass other identifiers? No, never. We are not looking for that. So
no, I wasn't. Just to be clear, I wasn't asking that at all.
Okay.
I was saying there is a national identifier which nobody can bypass because it's the legal one in a particular country, right? The Australian company number or the Australian business number.
Absolutely.
That exists, right?
Yeah.
And nobody's bypassing that, but the LEI is perhaps a useful additional number for purposes of international trade. But the question I was asking is, you use on the ground local agents, these LOUs, to verify these businesses, usually because you need someone you trust on the ground to do that, because at the end of the day, they are a national. What the question was, if that green box could present direct to the red box digitally verifiable proof of registration from the blue box, then why do you need the yellow box anymore? That's the question.
We need to get to the other participants. There's two hands up, and I'm going to just suggest that has already been suggested, I think, in another conversation. What if the authoritative business registradores, for example, wants to become an LOU?
They are an LOU indeed. Yeah. Not only banks are LOUs, also many business registers are LOUs all over the world.
That answers your question, Steve. They could do both, right? They could do both. So it's
very efficient. Yeah, it's very efficient.
Satyajit,
yeah. So the most efficient view of this would be the blue box and the yellow box merges. That's become one box essentially, right?
What we should bear in mind is this governance. What becomes interesting is the blue box is beholden to the jurisdiction in which it operates. It has a legal responsibility to fulfill under the government that it operates. It would also, if it becomes an LOU, have a responsibility to operate as an LOU to Glyph. Glyph would necessarily impose governance requirements on it. It should do, it must do, otherwise LOUs aren't equivalent. So now it has sort of kind of two masters, but one of them is slightly more powerful than the other because it justifies its existence. The jurisdiction is the one that says you are legally able to operate. So there's not an imbalance here, but there's a difference in the colors, blue and yellow, say, but they could operate at the same time. Satyajit, sorry, you've been very patient.
No, thank you so much, John, Steve, and Marine, for that one. So when I looked at this picture, by the way, I love it myself also. But what came to my mind was, is this an as-is structure, or is this kind of be the to-be that we want to create, right? Because when I look at the to-be, and I'm trying to put myself ahead, like 5 years or even earlier down the line, where we're already talking of DIDs, the decentralized identifiers. Steve mentioned about verifiable credentials, and then we have the self-sovereign identity. I mean, so just conflate that. What if the control is passed to the legal entity, like a self-sovereign legal identity, SSID or LD, if I were to call that, right? All of this can actually be done by the entity itself. So and perhaps the LOU can just give a way to say, okay, we're fine with it, or something like that, right?
So You're absolutely, that's a very good point. There's a development of the LEIs of the VLI that I mentioned before, verifiable LEI, and it has some of the qualities you were just describing. So it's some of the qualities that Steve was describing also in the UNTP concept. Credentials issued by the organization that make claims that can be proven by others to be true, if you like. But one of the things that we always have to answer is the says who question. I know that's the name of my company, but says who. So when you declare yourself to be this company, and I am the control of these keys, as Steve pointed out when he was talking, you need to not only prove you control the cryptographic keys that represent how this was protected cryptographically, you need to be able to show that you are indeed the company you claim to be. And that's typically somebody else needs to say you are that company. You can't just self-assert. So that's one of the reasons that Glyph does what it does and why we want to do what we want to do, and so on. Alina, are you able to talk yet? I know you've had your hand up. Is your mic working now? Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. And I don't think anybody else can. Temporarily, can I go to Ivan if that's possible while you're...
Yeah, let me try to complete. Yes, exactly. The governance exists because LEI, the Glyph is in charge of the governance. The LOU are the issuers of the LEI codes. And there's a vehicle, we have several vehicles to deliver the LEI codes. You cannot deliver openly, obviously. So we have verifiable credentials for that. You can embed also the LEI into digital certificates. But talking about the verifiable credentials, we have our own verifiable credential, VLEI, which is a self-sovereign identity scheme where you can delegate that action of spreading or distributing the credential by the legal entity itself. Once it's issued by a QBI. Again, we have LOUs issuing LEI codes, and we have QBIs, which are VLEI issuers, credential issuers. They could be the same entity, yes, and it happens very often. They issue the LEI and the credential at the same time. Again, there's a separate qualification process for becoming a VLEI issuer, a verifiable credential issuer. So everything has a credential. We have a long track record on this. So one of the areas we are prouder is that we have a very strong governance process for all of these processes that you see, and it's live and it's there. It's not a wish, so it's working. It's out there. So we are here just to contribute and to tell you what's going on out there, and you can reuse it.
So I know that Alina went out and come back in again. Hopefully she'll be able to talk. Steve, you wanted one more point?
I don't want to dominate this call, but I just have a question, I suppose. Given the state of current national registers in terms of their ability to issue their members with verifiable proof of membership, it's blindingly obvious why something like Glyph is quite valuable. What I wonder, though, is as national registers around the world are increasingly able to issue their members with verifiable membership, what extra value or in a governance sense or integrity sense or whatever does Glyph add? Is there some sort of history of legitimate trading or something? That it's one thing to say, oh, look, I can prove I'm this ABN. It's another thing to say, and I've behaved legitimately for the last 10 years and you can trust me, right? And the reason I ask that, because it's we're going to encounter this this question and potential friction, and it'd be good to have a nice story for it, right?
Well, I agree. I want to let Alina talk if the mic's not muted. My strong, ambition, desire is actually there's a complementary existence thing here. This is actually a complementary thing, and Glyph actually has this quality control and testing process that's foundational from its sort of origins as this anti-money laundering and financial fraud and so on. So it's providing quality above what the registrars typically have to do when they register a business. So I think it has obviously has a role and it has an ongoing role, but there's a way I think for us to collaborate quite powerfully. Alina, can we hear you yet?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so happy. I think my connection was really bad. Okay, I would like to mention a few things. In the first place, I have the same questions or inquiries as Steve. I don't understand if the authoritative registers can issue the identifiers, so why do we need GLAIF particularly? And I imagine Ivan could give us an answer. And on the other hand, I was also wondering, of course, might be that the lay or VLI could operate as a digital identity anchor in certain fields, such as commercial or trade registers regarding legal identities. But there are certain areas where I think it's not enough or sufficient that they could work as digital identity anchors. And specifically, I refer to land registries, where the LEI or VLEI codes do not identify natural persons nor properties, neither in the field of asset registers, as far as I know. So we only refer specifically to the trade or business register or businesses. Nevertheless, when we consider digital identity anchor, we consider this identifier to be applied to all fields: property registers, business, asset registers, products, etc. Not only to businesses or trade registers. So my main question is, in this case, because we are working on a draft for the standard or recommendation of United Nations. So I think it should apply globally. It should be global, not only specifically to a certain field, which is business registers. So this is my main question.
So I think I obviously applaud those points, Alina, since we're working together. I just want to quickly show the comparative model for our project, right? So the ambition for our project is that there are existing large participant sort of trade routes and supply chains that are already functioning, and they're registered in a number of different ways, the participants and the assets that are traded and the land upon which cattle are reared and all the other things. And our ambition is to initially, the first step is recognize those registrars that are authoritative registrars. So of all the things in the supply chain that might be of interest. So this model is sort of saying that there are an existing number of trade participants, many of whom may have an LEI, and they may use their LEI for a number of reasons during trade. But as you've pointed out, at the moment, at least, LEIs have a particular sort of footprint. They might grow that footprint. There might be an ambition for GLIFE to do other things, but at the moment, it's this specific footprint, and it has a particular purpose. And we have other things that we need to identify in the trade transaction. So it's an and, if you like. They're already registered with official authoritative registrars, and we want to know who those are. And they vary in quality and ability. They may have some digital capacity. They may not have some digital capacity. And some of them may be more rigorous than others. So to the point that we were discussing where the quality, the type of things that GLIFE is interested in, the issuance of an LEI, the requirements to meet may be different to the actual registrar themselves, the authoritative registrar. So to recognize a business in Panama may require a certain number of things. To get an LEI, if you're registered in Panama, may require additional things. And that's fine. That's the business of GLIFE and the business of the Panama registrar. So these differences are actually useful to the discussion, I think, because they give us areas where we can cooperate. So the one I want to highlight on this drawing, if I can, is, I'll do it with this thing here, this registration authorities list, Marin. Again, there are no decisions in this discussion, it's a discussion. I think that if this project, were to get, as Steve highlighted earlier, something like the PKD system, so the ICAO PKD system that does the passport key management processes, so we can travel with our passports internationally. If we have an authoritative list of authoritative registrars, that can actually support your data quality checks in your registration authorities list. It could be another check, another cross-reference, another thing. It would, in a sense, be a superset likely of what you have, or a different set, but it would be a valuable sort of cross-referencing, washing against kind of database. So that's one area I think we can look at how we might cooperate going forward. The other that's more interesting, as Alina was saying, is how do we look at the digital identity anchor structure, and what does that include? What are the identifiers inside this digital identity anchor, and which ones do we use? So that's probably another topic of conversation. On this page, when I wrote this up before the meeting, were our 7, as I look at it now, questions. I just kind of raced through one. We have areas of shared interest about, we are not interested in the actual registration of an organization. Initially, we're interested in the registrar of that organization. We need to get to the registration identity, the digital identity anchor piece that Steve has laid out for us in the earlier work. But the first instance is interested in the registrars and who are they, and are they fit and proper to be in the list, in the UN CEFACT list. And if you look at deliverable number 3, I could jump to that slide, but deliverable number 3 is the one that Alina has been working on, about the requirements to be met by authoritative registrars. It's a draft, it's for discussion, but we're sort of laying out what we think they need to do. So then the question that Steve highlighted at the very beginning, because he's a smart guy and can see the future, how might we recognize glyph? So if an LOU, so if a registrar, the Spanish registradores, wishes also to be an LOU with glyph, then what we would have in our little database is, in Spain, there is an organization that issues or is legally required to be responsible for business registration. And the way they publish their data is in these formats. So we could list the native, if you like, format in this standard Spanish registry, and we could list the LEIs that they also publish as an LOU. So like an and, in a sense, to this directory. And that's different to the decision that Steve was saying we could also make about including in the list of authoritative registrars organizations like glyph or organizations like GS1. My gut feel at the moment is they're not the same type of organization, the same type of thing as authoritative registrars that are legally anchored, if you like, in a jurisdiction. They have a very useful role to play, but they're a different kind of thing than the registradores of Spain or ASIC of Australia. Does that make sense to anyone in the call? Is that? Yeah. So I'm kind of heading towards a way of thinking. Alina.
Yes, I hope you can hear me now. Actually, this comment makes me think, because at the beginning of this meeting, Steve was wondering exactly the same thing, like regarding the requirements that the authoritative registers should meet. Should we, because we have to consider that there are many systems worldwide regarding registers. So should we list a set of requirements, strict, let's say, that applies to all different United Nations member states, or should we rather be friendly and recognize all sorts of entities? Of course, the question is not easy, because we have to consider that there are many United Nations member states that do not have a registry system such as most European countries, or countries like Australia or Canada. But on the other hand, from my point of view, we should not create a confusion between authoritative registers and other sort of entities, even private ones, because might be countries that have a registry system where the register is not actually such. It might even be a private entity or an administrative one, such as a cadastre. And of course, I think we have to set these requirements so that we do not create confusions between what is actually an authoritative register and other sort of public or even private entities. Regarding this issue, I would stick to the principles of European Land Registry Association, ELRA, and also the international CINDER, the International Association of Land Registries. Regarding these requirements, I'm actually working on. A different story is entities such as CLAVE. From my point of view, they're not public or authoritative register in this sense. So from my point of view, in the event that they would join, the GTR would not be in the concept of an authoritative register as such. Might be as a trusted identifier issuer, but then this is a different story, because in this case we would have to open the gate of other identifier issuers, not only GLAVE, because might be others as well. So I think we have to distinguish between the legal requirements that an authoritative register would have to meet to be considered as such on one hand, and trusted identity issuers.
I think that's where I'm landing as well. But as I offered to everybody on this call, we haven't fixed a decision about this. We wanted this to be a discussion and gather thoughts.
Yeah, so that we do not create confusions and especially conflict with other jurisdictions.
Yeah. So one of the interesting differences that we are approaching our model with, Ivan, that's different to GLIFE, is if we look at this diagram in front of us right now, the responsibility for maintaining the currency, the accuracy of the registration authorities list is effectively passing through or part of GLIFE's operational model. You're taking data from the LOUs, who are taking data from what they do. And what we want to do is actually put that back on the registrars themselves. So the sort of process we imagine is that a registrar wants to be listed in the UN CEFACT list, the sort of PKD of authoritative registrars. They meet certain requirements, as Alina is saying, about they actually do have a legal basis, they actually do represent their country, and so on. And then they will put into the system the data about them. And what we want to do is make them capable and responsible for maintaining the currency of that, because we want a sort of lightest weight possible way of keeping things up to date, and the people with most interest in keeping things up to date should be the registrar of the country in which is operating. So we kind of, otherwise we get a big overhead. So our model, I'll jump to a sort of logical model that shows the deliverables and so on for the project. So this is what we're building in the project, the documents we're producing in this project. And what we're talking about right now are kind of deliverable 1, and a bit about 2. We're talking about the kind of who gets into this list, what does this list contain, what kind of attributes does it have. We want to get onto the digital identity anchor, which is sort of part of 3. We're going to build some pilots. But what happens is in this lovely, colorful UN circle, there's an operating entity. We'll make a recommendation about how to operate this entity. And I think it needs to be, for the UN's point of view, as lightweight as possible to manage it. Self-managing by the registered registrars is the better model, a bit like ICAO's PKD does. And that's the kind of way of thinking we're going to move towards. So it would be a self-managed by registrars data content, and that will then let you use that in your kind of cross-check, if you like, of the registration authorities list that you already maintain. That's one of the sort of slight differences about the way the project's philosophies are working. You've mentioned, I think, Alina, the other organizations that also do registration and identifier release, and I mentioned GS1 a few times. There are others. There's Dun & Bradstreet, which is a private organization that has a DUNS number, DUNS number, and again, it has a different purpose, a different value proposition. It's another number. So I think the approach we land on eventually for GLIFE and this Global Trust Registry project will be one that I would hope is repeatable. How will we treat GLIFE, which is, I hope, in a welcoming way, but in a way that recognizes what it does and how it fits in, is the same way we could likely treat others like GS1 and other organizations. That's about it. I do tend to promise these finish at 10 minutes to the hour, because I know Steve's got another 2 hours of meetings to run after this. We're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I suggest we can sort of draw a close now, but keep the conversation going asynchronously on the Groups.io web chat, or by emails if you prefer. We've got a Slack channel as well, and sort of keep the thinking going. We'll document it, the sort of recommended ideas about decisions, and hopefully get your feedback about how we think we should progress. Okay. If that's okay, I'll call quit, and thank you very, very much for everybody on the call.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
This was
John.
wonderful. Thank you.
Interesting
Thank you.
discussion.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Just give me a second. I might be able to stop recording. No. I just have to hang up.